Hello, my name is Paula Torres, and today I will be talking about groundwater contamination in Ranipet, India. Ranipet is a medium-sized municipality located along the Pala River bank and is situated in the Vellore district in the state of Tamil Nadu and is notorious for its tanneries and chemical treatment units. Before we go further in the topic, here's a table of contents of what I will be mentioning. I will talk about purpose and objectives in the next slide, and I will follow with a few graphs to assess the extent and damage on both people's health and the ecosystem. And lastly, consider how COVID-19 is likely to aggravate the situation. The purpose of this presentation is to shed light on how inadequate working conditions and environmental violations are threatening the health and safety of Ranipet residents. In the next slide, we will assess the extent of damage and identify sources of chromium exposure, which is one of the main culprits in the tannery industry. And lastly, once again, I want to emphasize that this is an ongoing problem and it's projected to worsen with COVID-19. So to understand the current situation in Ranipet, we have to consider the big picture. India is one of the world's largest exporters of processed leather, and the state of Tamil Nadu is a major center for these goods. The state alone is responsible for an estimated 60 to 70% of India's leather production. And on the right-hand side, we have a pie chart that demonstrates the percentage of goods produced between 2018 to 2019. These goods have a demand both domestic and internationally, and amount to about 5 to 6 billion earnings to the Indian economy. On the left-hand side, we have a graph that demonstrates the purchases made from 2014 to 2019. And we see that the USA is the top consumer of Indian goods, followed by Germany, UK, and Italy. And a lot of these tanneries that are located in India, about 45% of them are located in the Vellore district, which is where Ranipet is at, and 4 more nearby towns. So these industrial complexes are attracted to these rural towns because they pay lower land prices, they're exempted from taxes, and there are few pollution restrictions or controls that makes it an attractive place for them to produce leather. And although the tannery business is booming, Ranipet has regularly suffered power cuts and chronic pollution that leads to the closure of many of these factories. Of notable impact is the abandoned compound of Tamil Nadu Chromate and Chemical Limited, or TNCCL. And this factory is located in the Vellore district in Ranipet and operated from 1976 to 1996 and was closed by the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board in 1996 due to chromium contamination of groundwater. The Pollution Control Board estimates that about 150,000 tons of solid chromium waste have been accumulated over the 2 decades that the plant operated. And currently, the sludge and effluent discharge from the tannery is in an open yard in 3.5 hectares of land within the factory premises. So from the left-hand side, we see that the factory, delineated in red, slopes southeast towards Puliankanu and Korai lakes. And further downstream from that is the Pala River, which is one of the major drinking sources of water for Ranipet residents. So even though operations have ceased at the factory, the stacks of chromium have been causing groundwater contamination as the sludge, when it rains, infiltrates groundwater and further oxidates into the ground, which is a major threat for the residents that consume the water from the wells. So the study on the right-hand side shows different measurements taken from wells close to the TCCL factory, and the maximum contamination level of chromium in water is as set by the WHO, 0.05 milligrams per liter, and the pH of water should be 7 to 8. So we see from the plot graph, the wells most contaminated are number 5, 8, 9, and 16, which all fall close or within the TCCL premise. And number 17, 19, 20, and 22 are downstream from the site, but are also heavily contaminated. So the plume of the chromium is currently moving towards the Pala River, and will be a threat to the health and safety of residents and further contaminate wells that are nearby to the site. A single tannery can unfortunately contaminate groundwater within a radius of 7 to 8 kilometers. And this graph helps us understand the extent of damage by comparing metal concentrations in fruits collected near the Sipcot industrial complex of Ranipet. And from the graph, we see that the composition of mean concentration of metals shows that the metals compared, the concentration of chromium exceeded the permissible limit of 20 milligrams according to Indian standards. And the variation in accumulation level suggests that these plants differ in the capacity to both accumulate metals and also the quality and quantity of effluent discharge in soil and water will affect the amount of chromium that they absorb. And unfortunately, once these heavy metal pollutions contaminate the soil, they subsequently contaminate groundwater, and the water that is used to water these crops ends up contaminating the food that is produced. And this is one of the major pathways of exposure to Ranipet residents that are not working in the tanneries. But the ones that are working in the tanneries are directly exposed to chromium and are suffering health consequences because of it. So an important health risk factor for the tanneries workers is the occupational exposure to chromium that can enter their body both through inhalation, ingestion, and also direct contact. So chromium is rapidly absorbed in the lungs, and this affects the lung function capacity of the workers and also causes a lot of dermis problems, as we see in the pictures. So in the present investigation, a random sample of 197 male workers were taken from 10 tanneries, and the control group comprised of 117 male subjects of similar age group, but not working at tanneries. So overall, the data shows that the tannery workers have high levels of skin and respiratory disease when compared to the non-tannery workers. So we also have to consider the safety hazard that many of the workers are exposed to. We have to consider that a lot of them don't receive formal training. They're not aware of the risks involved with the chemicals that they handle. They're not provided personal protective equipment. And oftentimes, a lot of the instructions and the machinery they use is in a foreign language that they don't understand. So COVID-19 is likely to increase the problem, the pollution problem in Ranipet by causing closure of factories. A lot of the effluent is going to be left standing, as it was in the case of the TCCL factory. And unfortunately, due to COVID-19, there have been massive cancellations of export orders, raw materials are stuck in transit, a lot of payments are due from countries that have bought goods, and exporters haven't been able to collect their consignments because a lot of the goods that they produced aren't able to reach their destinations. So just as an example, countries like the US and Germany have started sending inquiries to negotiate lower prices. They have delayed their payments, and consequently, the Tamil Nadu Trade Union Center estimates that 50% of workers have lost their jobs due to COVID-19, and about 1.5 billion is lost in production due to the pandemic. So in summary, I want to conclude that saying that chromium waste remains an ongoing threat in Ranipet. It is a big problem in India, and the main source that is guiding this problem is a heavy dependence on the leather industry. And as a result, a lot of these factories are not regulated. Their effluent is moving underground and is leaving a tainted legacy in the towns nearby Ranipet and in Ranipet. Unfortunately, this problem, once again, is not single source. There are many tanneries operating in the region, and COVID-19 is posing a threat by forcing closures and layoffs of their workers. So here are the resources used. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.